Hello, Internet! Welcome to episode 190 of the Assorted Calibers podcast, the second-minute podcast that has a little bit for everyone. I'm Weer'd, and with me, as always, is the ever-lovely hostess, Erin Paulette. How you doing, Erin?
I'm doing all right, Weer'd. Last week I talked about Russia was invading Ukraine as we spoke, and I know that we're going to touch on that later on in the show, but I personally would like to dedicate this show to the Ghost of Kiev, the Snake Island 13, Marine Battalion Engineer Vitaly Skakun Volodymyrovich, and the old grandmother with sunflower seeds. Oh. And I don't care if they aren't real, all right? Ukraine is winning the propaganda war, and morale is important. So it's a very interesting thing to be greatly enjoying the spicy memes that come out of it, but at the same time, well, people are dying, and I don't like that. But oh my gosh, the just the stuff that's coming out of Ukraine in psychological cyber warfare, it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it really is amazing. And again, I remember watching the Gulf War, and it was like the first war that just had 24-hour live television coverage, and it was just like, wow, what's on TV? War. Interesting. And now we've gone up to, now it's TikTok artists and people on Twitter are live streaming the war, and then there are people doing severely dank memes about the war, and it's just we live in interesting times, Erin.
Yes, we do. So how are you doing, Weer'd?
I'm doing pretty good. I had a nice little vacation. My daughter was up in Maine, got a break from us, and now she is back home, and she had her first day back at school, and she was like, "Oh, it was so good to see my friends again." And yeah, it was a super busy day, but I guess on a hilarious in the let's make Weer'd the butt of all jokes.
You said butt.
I did say butt. I blame Oddball.
Always a good start.
Oddball posted a link to a knife. It is the Boker Magnum Rainbow Mermaid Liner Lock knife. And he posted this. It is a fully rainbow colored knife. It's got it looks like it's that titanium nitride rainbow color. I don't know if it is the legitimate stuff. And the spine of the knife is carved to look like a mermaid, and her tail curves underneath the blade to form the flipper / knuckle guard on it. And I just looked at it and went, wow, that looks like the skeeviest gas station knife ever. And then I went, oh, it's a Boker. They actually make decent knives. Oh, it's only $30. And then, oh no, it's not in stock at the place that he had originally linked it to. And so I immediately went online and started searching until I found someone who had one in stock. And I ended up getting it from Midway USA. And as I was attempting to check out, Midway said, well, if you buy $20 worth more of stuff, you get free shipping. I said, well, it's worth a look. And so I bought two other very inexpensive knives, both of them gun branded. One was a Smith & Wesson M&P branded knife that I can't even find online now. I think it was a discontinued product that they had in clearance, because I think I only paid $10 or $12 for it, and it's really nice. I remember back when Smith & Wesson branded knives were hot garbage. And the other one was a Remington branded knife, which is, I guess, adds an extra level irony, because that was the knife that I grabbed to. The M&P and the Remington were both in just simple cardboard boxes, while this Boker knife was shrink wrapped and in a metal tin container. And so I went, well, I need to open this up. I have these other knives. And the the Remington knife, it's got a really nice blade shape to it. And it's a very thin profile, but the handle is very, very slippery. And at the time, it's changed now, but at the time there might have been some like grease or just how they tightened it from the factory. The action was very, very stiff. And so when I was flicking it open to open the mermaid knife, the blade slipped out of my hand and clattered onto the floor. And I went, "Ooh, ouch." And I looked down at my shirt and it was getting wet. And I lifted up my shirt and then I immediately grabbed a paper towel and put pressure on it and called my wife. And I noted that before she came down, I said, "Just so you know, I've cut myself." And so I had essentially inserted the tip of the blade had gone straight through my shirt into my stomach. And luckily, long story short, not too terribly deep. I think it went through the full thickness of the dermis, but it did not penetrate my abdominal muscle and therefore get into my intestines. And so I am currently all stitched back up over a mermaid knife.
Stitched up? How long was this cut?
It was only about the width of the blade, so I think it's like maybe 3/4 of an inch. It was straight in, straight out.
All right, that's still. I mean, it clearly didn't require many stitches, but all right, that's pretty respectable.
Yeah, the tech put just one on each side. I would have put a third in the middle, but it's healing up quite nicely. So that's all my years of doing rodent surgery, where essentially I did plastic surgery stitches whenever I closed up an animal, just because they're so much smaller and they're gonna pick at their stitches. You're gonna lose a couple. This it was all over that. As I was showing my wife, I said, when we got back from the clinic, and I was only gone for about an hour. There was like no wait. It was beautiful. They put it in, they cleaned it all out. They sewed me back up. I told her that I was a veterinary surgeon, and so therefore go ahead and tell me whatever you're seeing, because I want to know what's going on. And so she was very, very pleased that she could just speak freely, because some people get quite squeamish when you talk about what they've done to themselves.
Mm-hmm. I'm one of them. Hello.
Yes. Though, yeah. When I looked down at it and the cut was opening up under its own power, I'm like, yeah, I can't close this myself. And probably it's also something that I should have looked at just in case. And so, yeah, it was the right move. Though my wife says that I also have to go back to them to have the stitches removed. Though I'm like, I could do that. We'll see. I might tell her that I did.
Jeez.
Such are wives. But
getting stabbed by gravity wasn't enough. Now you're going to pick at the sutures.
No, it's more like centripetal force. Like I was standing up, and it didn't really fall onto me. It more of kind of spun into me, and because I was flicking the blade open, and it slipped out of my hand. So it kept that rotational motion. I believe it's a little bit of a blur of exactly what happened. But yeah.
Well, I mean, the original point of mermaids were that they were man-eaters.
It's true.
They would lure sailors to their doom and drown them, and then probably eat them. And you have been a sailor.
I have.
I don't know what you were thinking.
When we got home, I definitely said to him, I'm like, okay, well, now that we're back home, I can open this package that I was trying to open, and open it up. I said, you should stick around and see this. And she's looking at it, going, "Who is?" So I'm like, who is this? Who is this marketed to? This is like the strangest looking knife ever. And I said, I think it's for anyone who wants a knife that screams, "I'm not that into chicks."
Well, see, I have to differ with you, because I'm very into chicks and I want one.
Yeah, well, at the time of me sending this to, there is a Blade HQ knife there in stock. You know what? I'm just going to keep this tab open. So you know what, Erin, Don't go buying anything just yet. I might have a moment of weakness.
Okay.
I want to inflict this knife on this. It's a nice knife. It's actually surprisingly nice. The functionality is a little bit disrupted by the fact that there's a big mermaid on the spine, so it's not going to cut through things as well as a knife with a smooth spine. But I mean, it definitely feels good in the hand, and Boker doesn't make a bad knife.
So is this the knife that stabbed you, or was that something else?
No, it was the $10 Remington knife.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was the one. Yeah, this package was entirely unopened, but when I left my blood-soaked kitchen to go to the clinic.
I mean, I was about to say, it's like, you're saying it couldn't cut through anything. Well, it stabbed you pretty well.
Well, I mean,
but different knife.
And this one could, because I mean, it goes through. But no, the Remington knife that I have is a little tiny one. It's like maybe a 3-inch blade, and it's like a stiletto point. Like, it is a very, very sharp point, which is very good for penetrating. As one would say, surprisingly sharp. Shockingly so. So that was my big excitement for the week.
So you know what? I think we have an excellent chance here to pivot from your surprise penetration to the other surprise penetration that's happening in the news right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you want to talk about this because you love talking. So let's talk about Ukraine arming its citizens in response to the invasion. Now, I first discovered this when that bastion of consistent thinking, Occupy Democrats, posted a tweet that said, "Breaking. Ukraine's interior minister announces that 10,000 automatic rifles have been handed out to the civilians of Kiev as they prepare to fight tooth and nail to defend their homes against Putin's invasion. Retweet if you stand with the brave Ukrainian people." And, I did some digging, I did some looking, and in 2016, Occupy Democrats made a tweet that didn't age well. It says, "No civilian needs an AR-15 regardless of whatever mental gymnastics you do. You are a very special breed of stupid." So, civilian ownership of semi-automatic rifles, bad. Ownership of military-grade automatic rifles, good, according to Occupy Democrats.
Yeah. Erin, if you wouldn't mind putting those in the show notes, I think everyone would like to see those adorable tweets. Because I agree. I have seen a lot of let's just say strange bedfellows who are standing up for Ukraine and talking about how they're brave and they're good for repelling this invasion of the Russian forces and all this. And meanwhile, yeah, these are the exact same people that think under no circumstances should we have rifles. When I'm thinking exactly that is it's a shame that they have had, it's my understanding, and I'm not an expert in the history of, privately owned arms in that area, but that there's been heavy restriction on who owns firearms, specifically semi-auto and automatic firearms in the Ukraine. And so probably a lot of these people are handling these AKs and such for the first time.
Absolutely. It seems to be pretty consistent across a lot of Eastern Europe that you cannot own a firearm without heavy restrictions or none at all, and definitely not military grade select fire weapons. And according to other things that I have seen, now I know that during the Soviet era, it was a requirement for every male citizen, and probably a lot of the women too, to serve 2 years in the military. But the Soviet Union fell in the 90s, and I don't know if Ukraine kept that up. But even so, I'm hearing that boys as young as 14 are being given guns. And so they clearly have never spent time in the military to learn how to use these guns. I've also seen footage of, grandmothers being taught how to use these AKs. And I'm glad that Ukraine's parliament has voted to allow its citizens to bear arms in the defense of the nation. But do you know what would have been better? That would be if Ukrainian citizens had the right to keep and bear those arms before this invasion, because that would mean they'd already know how to aim them and operate them and maintain them. As I've said before, because I'm a prepper, the best time to learn anything, be it first aid to firearm operation, is before you need it. The worst time to learn it is when you need that knowledge the most and you don't know anything. And so I've mentioned this on my public figure page and on Pink Pistols and on Blazing Sword, talking about this and saying this is just one reason out of many why the Second Amendment exists. So exercise your rights to own a defense rifle and learn how to use it.
Yeah, and there's been a famous, we're talking about all the memes that are going around. There's one that I think's gotten a lot of traction of, there's some, I don't even know who the person is, but he's giving a live shot interview with a reporter, and there's several men with rifles behind him just kind of standing at attention, and one of them shifts his rifle and he brushes his hand against the paddle of his gun and dumps the magazine onto the ground. And then somebody kind of sneaks in on all fours. You just see the top of his back go through, and he kind of hands the magazine up to the guy, and he just kind of takes it and doesn't actually put it back in. And it's very clearly that guy probably hasn't handled that weapon much at all before that moment. And so it's a simple mistake that anyone could make. And if you had shot 1,000 rounds through an AK, you probably wouldn't be making that mistake as readily. And certainly, if you'd shot 1,000 rounds through an AK, you'd be able to slap that magazine in without looking at it pretty easily. So that is one of the great advantages to our gun culture. Is, we talk a lot about self-defense. We talk a lot about possibly, a tyrannical government, but also the idea that, hey, somebody could try to invade us. And was it Yamamoto? I thought about this morning, and I thought I was going to look it up, but it just was such a busy day I forgot to. Was it Yamamoto who allegedly said that they shouldn't invade the United States because there'd be a rifle behind every blade of grass?
Well, that is the story. I don't know who actually said it. I don't know if it was ever actually said, but it is attributed to Yamamoto. Yes.
And again, it could be an apocryphal quote, and we don't know, but at the same time, it's a very real mechanic. I mean, obviously we just withdrew from Afghanistan, and it was because, there was that conflict was not going anywhere else. And so it's just better for us not to be there. And I think the same thing may happen with Russia. They may take Ukraine, but these people have rifles and this is their home. It's going to be a pretty sticky wicket for them to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
Pivoting onto the home front, this is, I guess I could bring this up as a little bit more of a lighter post than Russia trying to take over a sovereign nation, which, I won't lie. I've got mixed feelings about the whole Ukraine thing. I very much, have ultimate sympathy for the people of Ukraine, and I hope that they do end up repelling Russia. But at the same time, also, it's also really none of my business. And I almost feel callous for saying that, but I really do hope that we don't send U.S. troops into it, because I just don't see that as a really good idea. And I could be wrong, but that is where I stand and where I have my mixed feelings on it. But one thing that's, I think, a little bit lighter is the ever-growing politics of gun control here in the United States. And there have been several movements that have been going on to try to push President Biden to go after gun control. Of course, after Biden preached that he was going to push for gun control, and it was one of the key platforms of his presidency, and a whole bunch of stuff showed up in the House of Representatives right off the bat once the new reps were sworn in, and then they went to the Senate, and then they died a horrible death, or they were killed in committee. They were smothered in their crib. And then really there hasn't been a whole lot else going through. I mean, honestly, I don't think there's any gun control bills being floated right now. And clearly, if you are a professional anti-gun lobbyist, this is upsetting to you. And so a list of pretty much all the anti-gun groups have penned a letter to President Biden to push forward more anti-gun legislation. Let's see. There was some of the talk about limiting carrying of guns on federal public lands, getting rid of stand your ground laws, standardize the definition of a mass shooting instead of the current one where 4 people are killed in one event. It's 4 or more people are shot. So they're asking for a lot of stuff. And this is, like I said, huge numbers of groups. Like I was reading through the signatories on this letter, and I didn't even realize some of these groups even existed. And so, and so far, President Biden has not made a response to that. And may I be a little bit gleeful, Erin?
Well, why are you asking permission? Why start now?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about Manuel Oliver on this show. He's really mostly been doing Spanish language interviews recently. So I haven't had one of his videos to Fisk, but we started with the whole like zombie porn video of his where he had some CGI people reanimate his son to talk about gun control. But he lost Manuel Oliver. He was born in Venezuela. I don't know if he's a U.S. resident. And his son Joaquin was killed in the Parkland Massacre. And he has been very, very close with Every Town in March for Our Lives, but he also has his own group called Change the Ref. And the most recent campaign that he has been doing is he's calling it the shock market, where the video that he has on his website is him standing in front of the White House, holding up essentially one of those little ticker tape boards. And it's supposedly showing deaths to gun violence as they're scrolling by in real time. And evidently there was a larger, he's always completely alone in all these videos, but evidently a larger gun control protest happened. And in the course of this protest, he climbed a crane to hang some sort of anti-gun sign from the crane. And I assume he didn't own this crane and did not have permission to climb it, and he was arrested. And so pretty much the response to gun control from the at least from the Capitol Police is simply to arrest Manuel Oliver.
I do like the fact that the gun prohibitionists are finally holding a Democrat administration to the same standards that they hold a Republican administration.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk about why that is, especially since Biden was all about the gun control, and then 2020 happened and he didn't touch it. But I admire consistency in the same way that I loathe hypocrisy and double standards. And so I like to see this. And other people aren't happy with the fact that Biden isn't doing what he said he would do. Great. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad he isn't passing or signing more gun control, but it's nice when both sides are attacked equally.
Mm-hmm. I would even put the converse on that, which is that when Trump was elected, I'm seeing very much a parallel between President Biden and President Trump as far as guns go, is that Trump was elected as a very, very pro-2A candidate, and he gave speeches at the NRA, and he stated that repealing gun control laws was going to be a key platform to his presidency. And what we got bump stock bans. So it would be really, really neat if Biden would be nice enough to sign some sort of executive order that relaxes some issues for gun owners. Actually, I may speculate on that later on in the show. But yeah, the Republicans really also need to learn to take a page out of this, which is that if you are rooting for a pro-gun candidate and standing up for that and being in front of groups like the NRA and, National Shooting Sports Foundation and, whoever's going to be the surrogate for all American gun owners on the political stage. Well, then once they become president, why don't you call them out on it if they don't actually continue and work forward with getting some pro-gun laws passed? Because, man, we had the Hearing Protection Act and we had national reciprocity, and boy, those would be nice right now.
All right, so enough of our main topic. Now on to our segments. In exactly the same way that the AR and AR-15 doesn't stand for assault rifle, the AR and AR-500 steel doesn't stand for armor rating. David is here to tell us more about shooting the fun targets, steel and Tannerite.
Hi, and welcome to Gun Lovers and Other Strangers. In this segment, I'd like to once again talk about gun safety. This time specifically in regards to the use of reactive targets. Most of our listeners are probably familiar with steel targets. I'm sure many of them have shot gongs or plates on the range. But as with any element in the shooting sports, proper care must be taken to utilize them in relative safety. Steel targets, proper steel targets, are made of hardened steel plate and have different rating numbers and thicknesses depending on intended use. The two main ratings we're likely to see are AR-500 and AR-550. AR stands for abrasion resistant, and the number is hardness on the Brinell scale. AR-500 targets are rated for handguns up through Magnum calibers, and AR-550 are rated for centerfire rifle up through 50 BMG and 338 Lapua. Generally speaking, the higher the Brinell number, the harder the steel. Steel too far below this range will crater and deform relatively easily, and much above this range it becomes too brittle and is likely to shatter. The two most common plate thicknesses encountered are 3/8 and 1/2 inch. These generally affect target longevity. The greatest risk when shooting steel plates is bounce back. They'll generally deflect lead and copper fragments at roughly a 20-degree angle from the face of the target. This can be ameliorated to some degree by using proper positioning of the target on the stand and proper distance based on the cartridge being used. Another thing to consider when shooting steel targets is the method of hanging the plates. Setting up the plates so they can swing is much preferred to fixed plates to help reduce bounce back and prolong the life of the plates. If bolts are used to hang the plates, round-headed carriage bolts are recommended. Heavy rubber straps are preferable as they don't cause additional deflection angles. However, the rubber straps are consumable items and will need to be replaced regularly. Steel targets should be positioned so they are at a minimum 15-degree down angle when viewed from the front. This will direct most of the splatter into the ground, but some will still come back towards the shooter. Which brings us to distance. When shooting with pistol calibers, steel targets should be no closer than 10 yards. Magnum cartridges should push that back to 20 yards. When shooting rifles, the distance increases with muzzle velocity. Regardless, when shooting steel targets with rifle calibers, minimum distance should be 100 yards. Always check the steel targets for damage when first shooting and increase the distance if the rounds are causing damage to the plate. If handled respectfully and with proper consideration, shooting steel targets can be relatively safe and absolutely fun. There's nothing quite like the tink or bong sound of hitting steel from a distance. The next reactive target I'm going to cover is Tannerite. Tannerite is an impact-sensitive binary explosive developed in the mid-1990s by Daniel Tanner. It's shipped and sold as two separate components, a catalyst, usually aluminum powder, and an oxidizer. These are mixed together shortly before shooting. While relatively stable even when mixed, Tannerite will detonate when subjected to sufficient force, such as a high-velocity bullet impact. When it goes off, it will produce a loud boom and a considerable volume of white smoke. Tannerite also sells gender reveal kits with blue or pink colored powder and a 1-pound Tannerite binary rifle target. Even though it's perfectly legal at the federal level to use and own Tannerite as a shot indicator, ATF regulations state that once Tannerite is mixed, you can't store it unless you have an approved bunker and the proper licenses for handling explosives. For safety, the manufacturers recommend the quarter, half, and 1-pound targets be placed 100 yards downrange and 2-pound targets 200 yards downrange before shooting. I am not going to provide links, but there are numerous stories and videos of people misusing Tannerite and causing property damage as well as injuring themselves or others, sometimes fatally. The manufacturer website addresses this specifically with 2 statements. Never place these targets inside or on top of or under any metal, rock, or other surfaces that could produce flying debris or sparks or within another object. This is dangerous and constitutes improper use of the product. The second statement, Tannerite brand targets are sold as a shot indicator. If you are misusing the product or destroying public property, we will not help you. While there are other reactive targets on the market, steel plates and Tannerite are the 2 most commonly encountered. Follow the directions and all proper safety protocols, and everyone can have a fun day at the range while still going home with the same number of limbs and the same amount of blood as when they started. That about wraps up this segment. If you have any questions for me or suggestions for future segments or a comment on a past segment, please post them on the Assorted Calibers Podcast Facebook or MeWe pages, and Erin or Weer'd will make sure I get them. I'm also a contributor on the Blue Collar Prepping blog, which can be found at bluecollarprepping.blogspot.com. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. I'm David, and this is Gun Lovers and Other Strangers.
May I start out by saying that David, much like my daughter, seems to think that Christmas music is totally acceptable to listen to even into March.
I mean, I'm amused both by the fact that it's several months late and also David is Jewish. So I did not expect Christmas music at all.
Yeah, and though that is an excellent video, you need to go check it out. And I mean, it's impressive. I was amused by the how sonorous that was, but at the same time, also I've had it with Christmas music. I don't like Christmas music even in the Christmas season, and it gets worse the further away from winter we get.
Sonorous?
Yeah.
I mean, I know what the word means. Are you sure you meant that?
Is did I not use it correctly?
I'm not sure. What do you think it means?
Song-like.
Not really. No.
Oh.
It's it's sonorous implies deepness. Imposingly deep or full. I mean, there is a ringing sound associated with it, but it's a deep ring, not a high ring.
Gotcha.
It's imposing. It's majestic.
Well,
and that was ding 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 ding.
So I'll just say dulcet then. How's that sound?
Yeah, I think that works better. Sweet and soothing, sure.
So another interesting thing to talk about is that there might be more companies. I just pulled up one, but I think there's several companies that make quote unquote steel targets that aren't made of steel but are made of polymer. And so they're designed that the bullet will travel through them, but it will slow it down enough that the kinetic energy will allow it to react in a similar way to steel, but they don't make the ringing noise. But it does mean that you can like shoot them at contact distance without any risk of lead bouncing back at you. One last thing I will say is that David is not joking when it comes to mixing Tannerite and steel targets. I've got a picture in the show notes of me sitting in front of what once was Nate Spencer, who does our lovely music on ACP. His car.
You blew up Nate's. Oh, okay. I wasn't being serious, but the way you phrased that, I was standing in front of what was once Nate Spencer. Oh my God, you blew him up!
No, I bought his car for $1, and then blew it up. We one of the Tannerite charges was set on top of the essentially the spot where the window gets cranked down into the door. And that explosion propagated through the door and blew a very large chunk of metal up over our heads, and it landed about 25 yards behind us. That could have gone very, very, very bad. I will forever be much more cautious anytime I'm ever using any sort of explosive target.
All right, so going from fun smoke to a different kind of smoke. Hey, Weer'd, what does Xander have for us today?
So now on to some real madness. Reefer madness. Xander brings us his independent thoughts on that point where the war on some drugs and the Second Amendment collide.
Welcome to Independent Thoughts with yours truly, Xander Opal. I recently had an interesting conversation with a couple of coworkers. While not firearms owners yet, they are friendly to the idea of owning one. Unsurprisingly, neither is familiar with the infamous Form 4473 that prospective buyers have to fill out before purchase of a firearm from a licensed dealer. Like many recent new gun owners, they are friendly to the idea of legalizing marijuana. In fact, Michigan has recently legalized, on a state level, pot. The problem is, Mary Jane is still extremely illegal on a federal level. The current edition of the form specifically notes this at the question. One used to be able to use a Michigan concealed carry license instead of a NICS check. The ATF put an end to that when it was shown that the CCW license and the chronic card are not mutually exclusive. A person can be approved for both, as neither system talks to the other. At some point, this is going to come to a head. Shopping for guns, depending on the state, can range from casual to painful. The process is the punishment, and anti-gunners are happy to bring someone to the end of their rope. Combine that with the iron law of bureaucracy, where the ATF will no doubt proudly defend the innocent would-be gun owner from the dangers of hemp. Joint action really should be taken by Congress to make it easier for people to exercise their rights as they go about their day in good faith. Worse, youthful misadventure, a guilty plea to a drug charge in exchange for being let go, follows someone for life like a scar visible only to the government. Decades of clean living mean nothing to the slow-grinding, never-resting, never-forgetting wheels of justice. And again, the anti-gunner folk would gladly stand on the backs of their supporters to rise above the weeds, claiming that, like a century ago, it'd be terrible to have intoxicated people buying guns. I do hope that their supporters rally back when their mellow gets harshed. Personally, I think if someone is addicted to any substance, the legal system is not how to help them. Overall, the history of marijuana laws parallels the Jim Crow gun control laws, and the streams got crossed in Form 4473. And a last thought. I wonder how many more gun control laws might fail if more people had a good idea as to what makes someone a prohibited person. One more gun owner just might save one more life. Doesn't that make it worth it? Have fun, be safe. I hope I gave you something to think about.
I have to say that Xander was really on fire with his pun game. Because the first time, chronic card. What? Okay. All right. That's clever. Come to a head, shopping for guns, joint action, rise above the weeds. I actually wonder if I've missed one or two. but very clever, Xander. Well done.
Yeah, and if you want to hear some more Xander puns, the latest episode of Geeks, Gadgets, and Guns he was on, and let me tell you, I several times yelled to no one in particular because I felt like I was in a chat room with him, but I was not on the Xander, go lay down. You know what you've done. So now onto that speculation on Joe Biden. One thing that Joe Biden might do, I guess I could say I have my doubts because he has also been very vocal as a supporter of the drug war. But again, he's also been very vocal about supporting gun control, but he sure doesn't seem to be doing a whole lot of it now that he's in the office. One thing that could happen is that Joe Biden could sign hopefully a law over an executive order, because executive orders suck, that would decriminalize marijuana on the federal level. And what would be really, really interesting about that is everybody that I know who has been arrested on marijuana charges has been charged in local court. They've been arrested in under state statutes, not under federal law. So if all of a sudden the DEA statutes on marijuana were repealed, nothing would technically change in your state. If you were in a state that does not have medical and or recreational marijuana, or one but not the other, nothing would change, because smoking marijuana is illegal in your state, it would still be illegal. And it would still be illegal in pretty much the same way, because DEA agents aren't pulling over Joe the pothead. And so I think that would be a great thing. And again, as Xander points out, it would be a great thing for gun owners. You know what? I wouldn't mind twisting up an old joint, and it's legal here in Massachusetts. There are stores that I can go to and buy some. But I'm not going to do that because I have a federal firearms license and a whole bunch of carry permits, and I don't want them to go away under this technicality that I am indeed breaking federal law and sidestepping a federal form when I go and purchase a firearm. And I don't agree with it.
One thing that was pointed out to me is that New York State, and possibly others, but I only know about New York State, is that they have a habit of assigning medical marijuana cards to people who haven't asked for them. And this is noteworthy because, as I understand it, in New York State, if you have a medical marijuana card, then it's just assumed that you're using the medical marijuana, and therefore you cannot buy a firearm there because, you're a drug user. And this is just a very, very sneaky way for them to attack the gun culture. Well, here it is, and you might as well go smoke because now you can't own a firearm.
Yeah, and how crazy is that? Because I own firearms, and I've absolutely done opiates because I've had surgery, and I've gotten a bronchial infection and gotten codeine. And various things. And these are all, very, very coveted street drugs. But at the same time, it's perfectly legal so long as I have that little piece of paper that says the doctor says it's okay. But the little piece of paper that says the doctor says it's okay when it comes to marijuana doesn't amount to a hill of beans.
It's also perfectly legal for you to get blind, stinking drunk at home and own guns.
That may have been on the Double Dragon ACP film tracks. I'm just saying.
It makes no sense.
I'm drastically opposed to the war on drugs. I think it's foolish. I know so many people who do and have done all sorts of drugs whatsoever, and it's really wasn't that much of a challenge for them to get them. The only downside is who they got them from. I would much prefer people buying drugs from the same people that I get my pain medication from, or allergy medication, or whatever have you, rather than, say, cartels and or terrorist groups. And also, may I add that just like gun control, the war on drugs has a whole lot of deep racist roots and a lot of favoritism. So I just think that these are laws that we should get away from, and we should get rid of, because I think we need to criminalize the behavior. If you are drunk out of your mind and carrying a firearm around, that is a crime, and that's not a good idea. But same thing if you're high or tripping your gourd off. You don't go handle guns. Don't go driving cars. Don't go drive a forklift. These are common sense laws, and we can solve that. But if you wanna drop a tad of acid and listen to Pink Floyd, who's that hurting?
So, speaking of things we need to get away from, Ryan Bussey once worked for Kimber, and as we all know, the K in Kimber stands for quality, and now he helps gun prohibitionists by appearing on a Comedy Central show. There, I've saved you 16 minutes of having to listen to him. For the rest of you little masochists, here's a weird audio fisk.
So for this next fisk, I'm taking on Ryan Bussey. For those who don't know who Ryan Bussey is, he was the vice president of sales for Kimber. After his departure from that company, he has spoken out against the NRA and the gun industry, and currently is employed in the Giffords anti-gun group alongside David Chipman. He recently released his book, Gunfight, where he speaks out against the NRA and the gun industry, and has made multiple appearances on several podcasts and shows promoting this book, and giving his unique perspective as a gun executive turned gun control activist. In the show notes below, I have links to his podcast appearances on both The Reload with Stephen Gutowski, where Stephen does an excellent job at conducting a respectful interview, but also challenging some of Mr. Bussey's claims. Also, I have linked the Red, Blue, and Brady podcast, where the Brady campaign gives Mr. Bussey a green light to get as partisan and conspiratorial as he wants. And he does. I also have an Amazon link to his book. And just note, if you follow the link in the show notes, a portion of that sale will donate money to Operation Blazing Sword. Also in the show notes is a clip from The Daily Show, where Trevor Noah interviews Mr. Bussey.
You've written a book that I think threads the needle in a very complicated conversation that America is having. And that conversation is, what are guns? What do guns mean to America? And is there anything that can be done to try and reduce gun violence in the country?
So I thought I'd lead with this clip because I would note that anti-gun groups have attempted to monopolize the stop gun violence agenda when really neither side stands for gun violence. Further, I would note that gun control does not correlate with less violent crime or gun violence at all. Just for fun, I put a few studies in the show notes on violent crime figures in relation to constitutional carry. Turns out, if you want less violent crime, dumping your permitting system seems to be a good start. Ironically, one of Mr. Bussey's first ventures into gun control activism was his vocal opposition to Montana's constitutional carry law.
And just so people have an understanding of who you are, I mean, you're like the poster child for the NRA. I mean, you were gifted shotguns as a kid, right? You were an avid hunter. You were an avid defender. You still are of the Second Amendment. You worked as for a gun manufacturer for 25 years, and yet you say that there is a lot that is wrong with the gun industry.
This is nothing more than an appeal to authority. We know that owning a gun doesn't make you an expert at shooting any more than owning a piano makes you a musician. Of course, Mr. Bussey is an avid hunter. I assume he knows how to shoot. But all of that doesn't make you a supporter of the Second Amendment.
More than anything, I think the gun industry and the NRA changed around all of us.
He's not wrong. He's probably old enough to know the pre-Cincinnati Revolt NRA, where the NRA members, fed up with an NRA increasingly complacent with gun bans and restrictions and hyper-focused on only hunting and sport shooting, the members pushed for an NRA that supported the right to keep and bear arms, both for sportsmen and those defending themselves and their country. Also, I will note that the NRA was founded as a paramilitary group by Union generals looking to improve the marksmanship for future American soldiers. And of course, today we have an NRA that seems to be only serving Wayne LaPierre and doing little to nothing for gun rights. So the NRA has always been in flux, as has the gun industry in general, and this is neither a recent nor an alarming trend.
The right to self-defense and to own guns and to do things that I love to do with my boys and to shoot and to hunt and all of those things is fantastic. But if it's not balanced with responsibility, it's going to run out of control.
Okay, this is the first instance of overhyped rhetoric. When has gun ownership ever been pushed as something for the irresponsible? We'll soon see that irresponsible really just means people doing stuff that Ryan doesn't like.
And I started to see things in the firearms industry and in my life and in my career where responsibility was not being inserted into the discussion anymore, and just runaway rights were taking over. And
as noted above, I don't think responsibility was abandoned. And runaway rights? You mean you think we have too much freedom here? Because I certainly disagree with that.
In the early 1990s and in the 2000s, when I got into the industry, it was a much different place where responsibility and decency were still inserted into the argument, and they're no longer there anymore. It's a very frightening place we live in now.
Again, I'm dubious of his claim of lack of decency and responsibility. But I will note, for gun rights in America, the 1990s were the dark times. Many of the horrible state gun laws we are fighting against today were enacted in the 90s, as was the most wide-reaching piece of gun control law in the history of this country, the 1994 assault weapons ban. And while the AWB was allowed to sunset in 2004, the anti-gun forces have never stopped talking about having it reinstated, frequently with much greater restrictions. I will also note that places like Massachusetts and California are under assault weapons bans that far exceed restrictions all Americans had to endure in the 1990s. So no, Mr. Bussey, I don't look back at those times as very good at all.
I didn't realize that at some point the NRA essentially became more powerful than the manufacturers of guns themselves. You talk about a moment where Smith & Wesson decided to stand up and say, actually, maybe we could do more for gun safety, and the NRA led a boycott against them.
First, let's not downplay what Smith & Wesson did. They coordinated with the Clinton administration to support gun control in exchange for them escaping lawsuits and being given preference when outfitting federal and law enforcement contracts. They were literally selling out the American people to save their own necks. I wasn't involved in guns when this went down, but I've included several articles on the resulting boycott, as well as talked with David, who was watching it when it happened at the time. And the boycott, by all accounts, was grassroots. And only after people started calling for boycotts, as well as dumped their personal guns on the used market, did groups like the NRA report on it. And they really weren't instrumental in the boycott. All of this resulted in the British Tompkins Corporation selling Smith & Wesson to Safety Hammer. And Safety Hammer made it very public that supporting gun control would not be a future agenda item for Smith & Wesson.
The NRA ran the show. They still ran the show. They set the narrative. Everything that they stated, every tactic that they laid down, everybody said, yes, sir, can I have another?
I can see how he might think this, but as a scientist, I will point out some data. The NRA is currently in freefall. The controversies around Wayne LaPierre and the board of directors has inspired widespread lack of confidence in the organization. They are losing members as well as donations. And all the negative press is hurting their once trusted name. How has the gun industry changed in these last years? Has the gun control industry had an easier time now that the NRA is severely weakened? While the NRA is a powerful group for its members, and I hope someday it can recover from this dark chapter and get back to helping gun owners gain their rights back, it's clearly not as powerful as the anti-gun groups make it out to be. Unlike the anti-gun groups, which are top-down and simply use membership to collect money, the Second Amendment movement has always been grassroots, meaning when a group like the NRA collapses, very little changes.
There's an intertwined sort of symbiosis between what drives success for the NRA, which is fear, conspiracy theory, hatred of the other, acceptance of racism. Those things drive electoral outcomes, and the NRA stumbled onto that 15 or 18 years ago. Those are exactly the same things that drive firearm sales. And so there's a very unhealthy symbiosis between those two entities.
Are you even listening to yourself? You just said the NRA led the firearms industry in America, yet the NRA has collapsed and there doesn't seem to be a power vacuum. But you're claiming the NRA is engaging in conspiracy theories and hatred of others. Yeah. If you can stand it, listen to the Brady Campaign podcast in the show notes, and you'll also hear Mr. Bussey's constant finger pointing at President Trump and the conspiracy theories he holds about his administration. Psychological projection is a hell of a drug.
There's a couple different types of flags that we saw on January 6th. We saw Trump and American flags, and then we saw the other type of flag we saw were come and take it AR-15 flags. Political radicals, right-wing political radicals in this country now are driven, are owned. They use guns as the central symbol of their identity.
You act like those flags just came out of nowhere or were pushed by the NRA as propaganda. Never mind the images you show are the aftermath of the presidential election where this was said on the national stage.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
And note the thunderous applause after that. Nobody challenged Beto O'Rourke on his plan to confiscate the most popular firearms in private hands. And just to make sure nothing is ambiguous, when Joe Biden won the nomination, he sat down with Mr. O'Rourke.
And by the way, this guy can change the face of what we're dealing with in regard to guns, assault weapons, in regard to dealing with climate change. And I just want to warn Amy, if I win, I'm coming for it.
And of course, this is the same guy who said this.
So to gun owners out there who say, well, a Biden administration means they're going to come for my guns.
Bingo. You're right if you have an assault weapon. The fact of the matter is they should be illegal, period.
So the reason why gun flags were flown was because this administration had threatened to take them. So I don't think this is radical behavior at all. But if you think it's radical, think of who radicalized us. It wasn't Donald Trump. It was anti-gun activists like Mr. Bussey.
But this idea that guns are somehow the symbol of some right-wing political movement, that's dangerous 1936 Germany stuff.
What? Did you just compare the right-wing activists to the Third Reich? Again with your whole bit of hatred and conspiracy theories. May I remind you that Hitler was a huge fan of gun control. And his political positions? They were hardly right-wing.
You talk about how that culture used to exist, and then it started getting mocked. Like you talk about the FUDs, as they call them, the Elmer FUDs, with the gun safety guys. Like, it seems like it's not cool to be safe with guns now in the world of gun ownership.
Another flag on the play. I haven't read the book, so it could be that Ryan Bussey describes Elmer Fudd as a safety-oriented gun owner. If so, they're both wrong. An Elmer Fudd is a gun owner whose only concern is sport and recreation, generally in a self-centered fashion. As in, if they compete in NRA high power, they might be cool with semi-auto rifles. If they shoot bowling pin matches or bullseye, they might be cool with owning pistols, but not semi-auto rifles. And both would be opposed to concealed carry and probably in favor of magazine bans. Meanwhile, you could find a Fudd who hunts ducks and or shoots clays, who thinks the only gun anybody should own is a double-barrel shotgun. Fudds are quislings who would sell out their fellow gun owners if they think they would be able to keep their guns. This is why they're so hated within the Second Amendment community. Safety has nothing to do with it.
I tell stories in the book about how the firearms industry 15 or 18 years ago would not allow tactical anything to be displayed in its own trade show. Gloves, tactical vests, AR-15s, high-cap magazines, those were not displayed in its own trade show.
And why was that?
Because the firearms industry imposed these rules upon itself, upon ourselves. We knew that this was a bad thing to infiltrate society with.
What is bad about AR-15s? What is bad about tactical gear? Do you think it's bad that police are now using AR-15s in tactical gear? Is it bad for soldiers to use gear that they trusted in deployment for outdoor recreation and personal defense? You call these things bad in such a matter-of-fact way, yet can you articulate why?
That sort of self-restraint is now gone, and the same exact thing is happening in our politics, right? Like the sorts of things that we once knew not to say, not to do, not to call your relative, not to call your coworker, not to say in polite society. That's all gone. The NRA and the gun industry perfected that.
I will agree that political discourse has become a lot less civil recently, but I think both sides are responsible for this. Hell, you just called Second Amendment activists Nazis.
I'm in favor of two things right now. One, we need to close the gun show loophole. We've been trying to do this since before Columbine. The kids in Columbine used guns that were purchased through the gun show loophole. 20-some years later, we still haven't closed it.
The Columbine killers did not buy any guns at a gun show. They bought 2 guns in private sales from men they knew around town. And given that both boys were underage and convicted felons, this was illegal, and both men spent several years in prison for breaking the law. A female friend of the killers also bought guns for them. She did not face any charges, only because she testified for tighter gun control laws in Colorado. So there's a friggin' horrible example to support your little agenda point.
Secondarily, I'm worried about the larger societal impacts and the graph of where gun radicalization and right-wing radicalization is taking our country. I don't think Kyle Rittenhouse was an aberration. I think he's a warning of what's to come. We need to outlaw as a country, state by state, county by county, or hopefully as a nation, open armed intimidation.
Again with the partisan rhetoric. Sorry, Ryan, but Kyle was a self-described Democrat at the time of the shooting. He may have changed party affiliation since then, mainly because people on the left are so quick to call him a murderer and a racist, when he was the victim of multiple assaults and was acquitted of all charges. Further, Kyle testified that he would have preferred to be carrying a pistol, but gun control laws made that illegal. So he wasn't carrying a rifle to intimidate. He was carrying a legal weapon for self-defense. And I will note, a weapon he needed that night.
You can't have democracy when one party is standing over the other with a loaded AR-15. That's not civil.
Implying that Democrats don't own guns? I'm thinking Mr. Bussey is pretty open about being a Democrat, and he owns guns. The new shooters that are flocking to gun stores are not all Republicans. The Second Amendment is not a partisan right. And I really don't like how much work Mr. Bussey is putting into making it so. I find his rhetoric to be hypocritical, inflammatory, and divisive. This is not what this country needs. Those are your anti-gun talking points and a few rebuttals to combat them.
You know what, Weer'd? I blame Bill Clinton for all of this. And not in the way you think. I'm old enough to remember a time when politicians, they didn't appear on talk shows. You know, if you wanted to know what a politician thought, you either watched a speech, or that's what Sunday afternoon news programs were for, with all the talking, arguing heads. They didn't appear on talk shows. And then you had Bill Clinton showing up on the Tonight Show playing a saxophone. And ever since then, late night has been weaponized as a way to advance politics. And what we need to keep in mind is that talk shows, they're not news. They're light entertainment where you've got a celebrity hawking their latest book or their movie or their TV show or their diet or their record or whatever. This is not a place for serious discussion. And for crying out loud, The Daily Show is on Comedy Central. It is not serious news. I mean, sometimes it tries to be, but it's on a comedy network, and it's a comedic... well, actually, I speak out of turn. It was a comedy when Jon Stewart was running things because he was actually funny.
But I mean, even with the we can throw the subjective bit if Trevor Noah is in fact funny on the Daily Show or not. I would argue not, though. Again, I always like to point out that some of his earlier stand-up stuff, especially the stuff where he talked about growing up in South Africa, was hilarious. But this was for those who, and I assume that's probably most of you, are not going to be like, you know what? I just listened to the Weird Audio Fist. Let me hear a whole bunch more of that. If you watch that whole interview, like there's no jokes being thrown whatsoever. This is like stone cold serious interview. And yeah, I don't get that. Like even the Jon Stewart clips that I've been doing for his stuff, he throws throws a couple of winks and nods at the audience, at least to let them know that, yes, I'm Jon Stewart and I'm a comedian. So yeah, I don't know why this was so stone cold serious. And again, boy, when he's given nothing but green lights, it's kind of amazing on the direction he goes. The NRA found a way of hatred and horrible, and by the way, they're all Nazis. Okay. Well, there we can't have divisive rhetoric in America now, can we?
Well, Weer'd, I think it's that time of the show where we thank each and every one of our listeners.
You know what? All of you listeners, each and every one of you, thank you.
To become a patron, go to patreon.com/Assorted Calibers Podcast to sign up. Patrons get an early release of the podcast, plus bonus content like our hilarious blooper reels, the ACP film tracks, and the ACP Magnum.
Also, please remember to rate us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us on the platform of your choice, and share the show with your friends, both online and off.
You can get more from me at my blog, which is weirdworlds.com. That's weirdworlds.com. Actually, you do it. That's WEERD world.com. And hear me weekly on Handgun Radio on the Firearms Radio Network.
My name's Erin Paulette, and I'm a pretty princess, and I formed this thing called Operation Blazing Sword. Yeah, I did that, not you. I'm amazing. I'm also part of pinkpistols.org, which is also an amazing thing, and I am absolutely spectacular, and I am bright like the sun. Some people say, thou art mortal. I am not.
And thanks to Nate Spencer for our music.
She pulled a reversal on me at the beginning as I attempted a comedic pause. And now she regrets it.
No, I know.
Our outros are assorted, and so is our podcast.
Say goodnight, Weird.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.